the sky above the North Atlantic was no longer blue. By the time the heavily battered SS Faraday limped slowly back to the gray coast of Cornwall, the heavens above them had become a constantly shifting, entirely silent canvas of fire. Shimmering, impossible curtains of emerald green and blood-red auroras drifted from horizon to horizon, visible and terrifyingly vibrant even in the full, unblinking glare of the midday sun. Sailors stood on the wooden decks in absolute silence, their weathered faces lit by the eerie, polar glow, watching as their brass compasses spun wildly and uselessly in their binnacles. The Earth's magnetic shield was actively faltering, its invisible lines of force twisting, tearing, and snapping like steel wires under an unbearable tension. The world was changing, fundamentally and rapidly. In the ship's laboratory, the tables were piled high with thousands of feet of paper telegraph tapes, recorded during the final, cataclysmic electrical discharge of the Atlantic Monument. A massive, high-density stream of ancient data that Kelvin and Arthur were now desperately working to translate before the global networks collapsed entirely under the strain of the shifting magnetic poles. The final transmission was not a mathematical riddle, nor was it a simple geographical warning. It was a library. It was a comprehensive geological and historical archive, written in the clear, coordinate-based binary language they had first decoded in London. As Arthur tirelessly transcribed the complex binary grids, Lord Kelvin translated the descriptions of a world that had existed millions of years before the first human ancestor had ever walked the Earth. The senders did not describe an empire of sprawling surface cities and towering monuments, nor did they boast of the conquest of other worlds or the subjugation of lesser species. Their civilization was entirely lithic, built directly within the Earth's crust, utilizing the natural heat gradients of the deep mantle and the magnetic currents of the spinning core as their inexhaustible sources of power. They did not burn coal, they did not build steam engines, and they did not pollute the sky. They tapped the immense tectonic friction of the continental plates, living in perfect, calculated harmony with the slow, deep respiration of the planet itself. But the sprawling archive also recorded the story of their end. 5 million years ago, their astronomers, observing the heavens from observatories carved into the highest peaks of a long-lost continent, had detected a massive, cyclical disturbance in the galactic medium. It was a vast, sprawling cloud of interstellar dust and highly charged cosmic radiation that the entire solar system was inexorably about to enter. The cloud would compress the sun's magnetosphere to a fraction of its normal size, triggering a devastating sequence of massive solar superflares that would violently strip the Earth's atmosphere of its protective ozone and flood the vulnerable surface with lethal, sterilizing ultraviolet radiation. It was a cosmic season, a period of violent purification that occurred with mathematical certainty every few million years as the sun traveled slowly through the dense arms of the galaxy. The senders realized, with the cold logic of their science, that no surface shield they could possibly construct would withstand the fury of the unleashed sun, and that their sister planets, Mars and Venus, were already barren, lifeless deserts exposed to the very same unrelenting wind. They were faced with two choices: perish on the surface in the blinding light, or turn inward toward the dark. They chose the rock. With a highly advanced technology that utilized focused, high-frequency acoustic waves to temporarily soften and mold solid basalt like clay, they carved colossal, cathedral-like sanctuaries deep within the Earth's mantle. These were vast, vaulted chambers suspended miles below the fragile crust, where the immense heat of the core could be carefully regulated for warmth, and where the thick, impenetrable basalt layers provided a perfect, permanent shield against the cosmic fire raining down above. They migrated in their millions, a quiet, orderly exodus from the light, leaving their surface cities entirely behind to be reclaimed by the grinding ice and the acid rain, retreating into a permanent subterranean exile. The translation implied heavily that their descendants still lived there, in the deep, silent dark, drawing their life from the warm, circulating blood of the planet, waiting for the storms to pass. "They did not leave us to die, Arthur," Kelvin said. his voice trembling slightly as he traced the translation of a massive structural diagram on his desk. He looked up, his eyes bright with a mixture of awe and terror. "Look closely at these schematics. These are not just historical records. These are the detailed engineering plans for the sanctuaries, the exact mathematics of the acoustic drills, the chemical formulas for the deep air regeneration chambers. They have deliberately left us their legacy. They have given us the blueprints to survive. But they left it at the bottom of the deepest trench in the Atlantic, sir," Arthur said, looking out at the red sky burning over London. "They hid it under miles of crushing water, where we could only possibly find it once we had developed the specific science to lay telegraph cables across the ocean floor. They waited for us to reach their level." "Yes," Kelvin replied, leaning heavily against the heavy oak table. "It was a test of maturity. A species that cannot cross its own oceans or understand the fundamental laws of electromagnetism would never possess the discipline or the science to build the deep sanctuaries. They left the key at the bottom of the world, knowing we would only find it when we were finally ready to use it." But the massive archive also contained the final, most terrifying piece of the puzzle: the precise calculation of the countdown. The magnetic field of the Earth, which had been measurably decaying since the very first scientific measurements were recorded in the early 19th century, was not experiencing a temporary, localized fluctuation. It was rapidly reaching the absolute end of its cycle. The magnetic poles were about to flip entirely, a catastrophic geological event that would reduce the planet's magnetic shield to zero for nearly a decade, exposing the entire surface to the full, unshielded, and lethal radiation of the solar wind. The vibrant, shifting auroras currently burning in the sky were merely the first signs of the collapse. The solar particles penetrating deep into the lower atmosphere as the protective, magnetic lines of force began to completely dissolve. The countdown did not point to a distant, hypothetical century. It pointed to our own time. Within a single generation, the fire would return, and the surface of the Earth would become an uninhabitable, sun-scorched furnace, just as it had 5 million years ago. In his quiet, gaslit study in Kensington that night, Kelvin sat alone before the dying fire, his hands resting heavily on the translated blueprints of the lithic sanctuaries. He was a proud man of the Victorian age, a defining era that believed wholeheartedly in the absolute triumph of human industry, the subjugation of nature, and the permanent, unstoppable progress of civilization. He had genuinely believed that we were the supreme masters of the Earth, destined to cover the globe forever with our iron rails, our steamships, and our copper wires. But as he looked up at the red and green auroras glowing fiercely through the study window, he felt the immense, crushing, and humiliating weight of the geological ages pressing down upon him. We were not the first to rule this world, and we would certainly not be the last to leave it. The ocean telegraph, which we had proudly built to link our bustling cities and expand our empires, had instead linked us directly to our ancient predecessors, delivering a message that was both a terrifying death sentence for our surface world and a detailed map to our only desperate hope of survival. The cinders were waiting patiently for us in the deep dark below, and the countdown was ticking its last few precious hours in the silent copper wire at the bottom of the sea. This was the warning from the Mantle. This was the blueprint for the end of the world. This was the warning from the Mantle.